In part 2 of this build, I got as far as completing the main landing gear bays. In this episode, it's time to start joining all these elements together and getting this plane to look more like a Sea Fury. Hello everyone, I'm Matt, this is Model Minutes, and join me on the workbench as I continue this Supersize model kit. Without any further ado, let's get into this one. Here's a list of the products I used during this particular section of the build, which might give you an idea of the kind of things to go and get if you fancy having a go at this particular kit. So first up, having completed the landing gear bays, there are some elements that still need to be added to this particular area of the model kit, such as the air intake on the leading edge. There is a photo etch grill for this particular part, which I use some super glue to pop into place. Just make sure you get it kind of the right way round. It does seem to have a slight, sort of almost like chamfer to the edges, and it fits in one orientation ever so slightly better than in the other. There are some representations of the cannon barrels which go inside of the wings, and they can be positioned into their slots. The same goes for these two air intakes as well. They come in two halves, which I've already joined together, and then they were glued into place. With that part done, I'm going to pay a little bit of attention to the lower wing surface. There is this small component which needs to be glued in here. I presume this just kind of helps the support arms, which I'll add later, go in the right place. And this was repeated on both sides. Because I want to install the underwing fuel tanks, there are a couple of holes that need to be drilled out on both sides as well. Having done that, I've flipped it over and glued in this component which forms like the cowling for the air intake. And now I can join the lower wing to the upper wing. The fit here is generally okay, but it does take a little bit of fiddling just to get things lined up correctly. And then at this point, this wing and landing gear bay assembly can be joined to the fuselage I've already built in the previous episodes. The fit here is quite good as well, but do take your time just to get the alignment right. Just as in the previous episode though, there is a seam that needs to be filled. Some Ammo MIG putty surfacer in medium was used to fill in this seam. This is effectively a duplicate of the one from the previous episode, just on the lower half. It was sanded as smooth as I could get it, and then using the 1mm B-Izzy riveting tool, I added the missing rivets. I did also find there was a small gap at the rear of the lower wing assembly where it joins the fuselage, so I paid a bit of attention to filling this in as well. Before I move on, I want to add a little bit of paint. There is the engine representation that I added in the previous episode, and I thought it would be a good idea to paint this in gunmetal, just in case any of it is visible in the finished build. It'll be much harder to get to that with other components glued in place. And speaking of gluing other components into place, these two parts which go on the nose of the aircraft were then added. Now I can turn my attention to the tail surfaces. The main parts of the tail surfaces come in two halves, which were glued together. These were then pushed into their slots at the rear of the aircraft, and then the elevators could be glued into place. I decided to put mine in a drooping position to give the impression that gravity is affecting them and pushing them down, as there's no pilot in the cockpit to hold them up. This retaining part can also be added to help complete this section of the tail. The rudder comes in two halves, which was glued together, and then this was also glued into place at the back of the model. This stage of the build is not absent of photo etch, and there are some little photo etch pieces which have to be glued into the control surfaces, and I found they were quite fiddly, so I had to take care here. With that done, I can move on to the ends of the wings. There are some holes on the inside surfaces of the lower wings, which can be opened up if you'd like to install rockets or bombs. I've decided I want to install the rockets on my build, so I opened up the holes as appropriate. It might not be particularly historically accurate to include the rockets on my chosen model, but you know, it's my build and I feel like adding them. With that done, the lower surfaces of the wings have loads of kind of support brace parts which need to be glued in. This was a little time consuming to get them all in the right places, and I think it gives more benefit for the folded wing option, but it does still say to do this even if you're not having the wings folded and instead having them extended like I am. Before I can add the upper wing surface, I do need to install the clear parts for the navigation lights. These were popped into place, and then a small amount of Tamiya extra thin allowed to run into the seams using capillary action. A small amount of this cement shouldn't react with the plastic parts and cause it to fog up. And sadly, it's at this point which I have discovered a little bit of a typo. The parts are clearly indicated as 9 and 10, 9 having 2 lights and 10 having a single one. However, as you can see in the instructions, they've effectively reversed this. Just be aware of this when you get to this point so you actually put the correct part on the right side of the aircraft. To pick out the centre of the single light, I'm going to use some demonic yellow. This was carefully hand painted on, and then using a small amount of Tamiya extra thin, it was glued into place on the correct wing. For the other 2 lights, I'm going to use pure red and green skin. Once again, carefully hand painting it onto the relevant lights, and then gluing this clear part into the wing when it had dried. And now I can join the upper and lower wing surfaces together, and once again the fit here is generally okay, but it does take a little bit of time just to make sure everything is aligned correctly. When that is done, I can start to think about adding the ailerons, which help control the aircraft in flight. Sadly, at this point I discovered another typo in the instructions. Just be aware of this, the parts on the D sprue are mislabeled. You do in fact need to reverse them. This did cause me a little bit of confusion, and I probably wasted about 5 or so minutes trying to figure out what was going on. In essence, what I would say is just cut all of the aileron parts off of their sprues and then just join the ones that fit together. So that's exactly what I did. I glued the ailerons together, and then because I'm having mine in the extended wing position, I need to remove the tabs from the edges of the wings. These are present to allow you to display it at the correct angle for the folded option, but in my version I don't need them, so they had to be removed. The ailerons were then glued into position on the relevant wings, not forgetting to add this small control part to the aileron in the little slot. Now it's time to think about adding the ends of the wings to the main assembly. There are these support struts which need to be pushed into the main wing, and this should help support the rest of the wing. There are these little panels which need to be kind of slid into place, but I really struggled to get them in position. I couldn't quite figure out what was wrong here and why they were not fitting, and I had to make modification to them to actually get them to fit. So this required cutting bits of plastic away and also parts away from the inside edge of the wing. This was a bit of a struggle. I couldn't figure out why the extended wings would not fit correctly without gaps, and it took a bit of time cutting away all the various bits and pieces to get there. After some considerable fiddling around and trimming away different bits of plastic, I kind of got to a point where this would slide on and look mostly okay, but it's not perfect. The gap here is a little bit excessive, probably a little bit too large. I don't think this gap would have been so big in the actual aircraft, because it would probably ruin the aerodynamics. So what I think part of the problem is that when I was gluing the upper wing surface onto the lower wing surface, I glued the upper wing to those brace supports as well, because the instructions don't tell you not to. I think had I not glued it to that, there would have been a bit of flex and things would have been able to slide into place a bit better. So hopefully this graphic I've put on the screen here explains it a little bit better. If you are doing your wings extended, it might be beneficial just to not glue the top wing surface onto these support parts, as it might not hurt getting things in the right place. Because I wasn't entirely happy with that gap, I decided that I would add a bit of the putty surfacer to fill it in, and then did some sanding and rivet rescribing to try and tidy it all up. And it's at this point I'm probably going to call this part of the build complete. And here we are, we're now at a point where this is actually starting to look a lot more like a Sea Fury. I would like to say that this part of the build has been particularly flawless, but unfortunately there have been areas which haven't been great. I had to make small modifications to the wings to get them to fit correctly, and there was a bit of sanding and filling in places, which, although I followed the instructions as best I could, there are a few gaps in places which just seem to be kind of present. Additionally, it's a little bit disappointing that I've encountered a few more typos with parts being mislabeled in the instructions, which caused a bit of confusion, but I think I've managed to overcome that now. I am on the whole very impressed with the general fit of the kit so far and the level of detail, but to say to get to this point has been a particularly easy process would be a bit of an inaccurate statement. This has definitely put up a challenge in places, but I am glad that I am making progress with it now. In the next part of the build I should be looking at completing the other sub-assemblies such as the landing gear legs, rockets and fuel tanks, which I have not yet completed, before I can move on to some painting, which should hopefully bring this project one step closer to being complete. Don't forget that we do have a Model Minutes Model Club, and if you'd like to join the Model Club, check out the links in the description. Massive thanks to these guys on screen for the extra support they give the channel. And if you'd like to join them and get exclusive access to early videos and other perks, full information is below the video. There are other ways to help support the channel if you'd prefer, but the best way to support the channel for free is by subscribing with notifications turned on so you never miss a modelling upload. Finally though, last thing to say is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time.